Who are college football's top recruiting head coaches?
Locked On presents The Portal, the daily podcast covering college football recruiting and everything NIL. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Welcome back into the Portal Podcast, where you get your daily recruiting, NIL, and transfer portal scoop. I'm your host, Brian Smith, longtime college football writer and recruiting analyst. Thank you for making the Portal Podcast your first listen each and every day. Truly appreciate you stopping in. Today's show is brought to you by our friends over at FanDuel. Right now, new customers can get $200 in bonus bets when your first $5 bet is a winner. Today's show is loaded. Talking about the recent commitments a little later in the show, how Florida is very likely to go on a recruiting heater, hearing some rumors about the Gators that we need to get into. We're going to be talking about Kirby Smart's comment, $20,000 a month to keep players committed. Is there a lot of truth to that? Is there any truth to it, and what can be done? But to start, we're going to be discussing the top college football head coaches as recruiters. Is your school one of those teams in the top 12? If not, why? I'm going to help figure that out with a good buddy of mine from Rivals.com, John Garcia Jr. John, how you doing today, sir?
I'm doing well, Brian. Just trying to keep up. Every day there's another big commitment to look back on from this first official visit weekend, and it's pretty much a prerequisite for the month of June. It's going to be a little crazy, but that's what we live for.
June and July, those are the 2 months that you and I don't really have sleep per se. There will be 400 plus commitments from the Power Four between now and early August. That's bottom line, like literally there'll be about that number. So anything can happen at any time. So just to put it in perspective, what I went off with, I just wanted everybody to see this. This is the list that I did. For the record, John did not participate in that, but I want him to kind of give his take on this. My list of the top 12 recruiting head coaches from 12 to 1. I got Venables at Oklahoma. I think he's a great evaluator. I've got Mike Elko at A&M. Another guy's a great evaluator, especially because he did so well at Duke. I got Kiffin at 10. I got Fran Brown at Syracuse, who's probably my one flyer. He's only been a head coach for 1 year, but in a few years, he might be at the top of this board. He is an unbelievable recruiter. Then you got Dabo Swinney at 8. Like, he's just a mainstay. There's very, very few guys that evaluate better than Dabo Swinney. Hugh Freeze at number 7. I think he's the most underrated guy on this list. He's done it at a program in between Alabama and Georgia. That is not an easy task. You got Marcus Freeman at number 6. He's a guy that could be at the top in a few years if they keep trending this way, but I need to see more. James Franklin at Penn State, another mainstay. They do a tremendous job at the Penn State program at finding the right guys for their fit. Dan Lanning, he's learned under the best. Kirby Smart, and then this other guy by the name of Nick Saban. Ryan Day at 3, Cristobal at 2, and number 1, not a really big surprise, Kirby Smart. I think my combination of why I went with this list, third part is just the actual recruiting, sitting down with kids, talking to them on the phone, sending them a text. The second is the evaluation, and number 1 is picking kids for your program that are going to stick. John, you and I talked about that off air. That last one is very touchy. A lot of the best prospects over the last 25 years that I've been around, I could tell that socially they were going to struggle when they went to college. You got to be able to tell when to cut bait, and it's very touchy because fans are like, why are we recruiting this kid? It's not a very fun thing to talk about publicly, but sometimes kids just aren't going to make it, and you've got to be able to swallow your pride and say, yeah, I know I'm not going to be able to change this guy, or maybe it's a family member around that's a problem. Those are the things that I look at now, and I say it a lot on this podcast here, the Portal Podcast, low maintenance recruits. The guys that get the best low maintenance recruits, like Penn State and Notre Dame, probably in that order, are the 2 best programs in the country at doing that right now. They were in the Final Four last year, but they don't necessarily recruit the way that Georgia and Ohio State do, but they get more retention than anybody. Those are the kinds of things that I looked at. Is there anybody on this top 12 list, John, that you're like, yeah, I don't think he belongs there? Is there anybody you'd like to add? However you want to do it. This is very subjective. I'm not like ironclad with this, but I thought it was a fun exercise.
It is, and it's subjective, like you said, based on the 3 main factors. I think this is pretty spot on. Yeah, I agree with you. I think Fran Brown is the green arrow up guy on this list, and I think as you expand the next couple of years, he's got a chance to crash that top 5 for sure. We've seen a lot of wonderful things there in Central New York. But yeah, I think if you're qualifying it in those traits, especially the culture element, I think that is sort of the X factor, right? Look, especially nowadays with NIL, everyone has a shot at a 5-star. Everyone has a puncher's chance, more so than before, to land a truly special, a truly elite recruit. But that culture element is what keeps them there and what really allows them to develop on your timeline as opposed to the recruit's timeline. And those guys you got at the very top of the list are pretty steadfast in that part of it. Hey, it's going to be on our time, not on your time. And there's still some sort of ground rules at a lot of these programs. So I do agree, especially with that element of it, because look, NIL is going to throw a wrench into all of this. But yeah, look, Lincoln Riley from a quarterbacking perspective, I would maybe consider for this list, not overall, but quarterbacking, which is obviously the most important. I think he'd probably have some fans, knocking on your door on social media with this kind of list. Obviously, with Michigan transition from Jim Harbaugh, makes it a little bit more cloudy in that evaluation, especially with all the other circumstances going on in Ann Arbor. But that battery, I think, would deserve some consideration here, especially relative to that culture element, right? There's a sort of perception that carries along with, hey, this is a Michigan defensive lineman. You kind of know what you're getting there, front 7 type of guy. I do think there's some credence to maybe getting a Wolverine on this list, but otherwise, I really do like it. Who are you going to knock off the list, right? Elko, from a developmental standpoint, over the last 4, 5, 6 years, a really nice job in elevating his guys while, inheriting an A&M program with more talent, and he's maintained it. Still some early draft picks with the Aggies, and we'll probably see a little bit more of that going forward. I like what you said about Freeze. Wow. Who's got a more uphill perceptional task than that guy, right? In the same state as Alabama and right next door to Kirby Smart, who's probably number 1 on everyone's list, whether you talk about in-game head coach, recruiting head coach, program builder, all of those things. Kirby is the standard right now. So for Hugh Freeze to be, 200 or so miles away, 250 miles away from both of those programs, and to still win head-to-head battles and recruit at a top 10 clip is pretty impressive. So yeah, he deserves a spot on this list. Absolutely. I think the easiest guy to overlook is probably Ryan Day, the guy who's got the newest ring on his finger. There's an expectation that talent just goes there, and to some degree, that's true. You're the power in your state. You're the power in the Midwest, where of course there is great high school football. But I think Day has put his own spin on that program. It's no longer the, he inherited XYZ. It feels much more like his deal. And you see the culture, especially offensively, of the type of prospects he's able to go out and compete for and win with on the recruiting trail. He's got his own signature on it with that national title to his name now. And he might have won the most important recruiting battle in the last, 5 years with the Jeremiah Smith deal. So that alone, warrants some top 5, top 10 status on this list. But it's also no surprise, Brian, that these top head coaching recruiters, first of all, are still in college, because it is a longer and more detailed task than it ever has been with roster management. But 2, these are the guys competing for natties. I mean, it's redundant. You hear the recruiting is the lifeblood of every program, and how much of that has changed in the NIL era. Look at this list. It hadn't changed a whole lot. The guys who grind, who recruit early, and who close, which is, the other element to this thing, those are the guys on this list. And those logos, those are the teams in the CFP race sort of year in, year out. So a lot of great names. I think Riley could have crashed the party. Brian Kelly's polarizing, but look what he's done at 2 programs, just from a talent perspective, I do think warrants at least consideration here. So yeah, it's a heck of an exercise, but this list is pretty spot on.
I thought that it was a lot of fun, and to be honest with you, I honestly looked at it from a perspective of how do we look at it realistically? Like who are on this list have overachieved? Like again, you Freeze. That's an awkward job at Auburn. It's not very easy. But beyond him, I think Fran Brown. Like I needed somebody that was a little different. He'd been a head coach 1 year, but he's stealing kids from Miami, Florida, and Florida State. We both know because we both live in Florida. Like you lived in Florida pretty much your whole life. That is not easy. So that's why he gave a jump. But the others, it's based on consistency too. Like Kirby, he learned from Nick. No offense, but I'm going to lean on that pretty heavy. That's not hard for me because he just doesn't miss on the evaluations that much. He'll take a 3-star kid that you and I are like, are we sure about this? And then 2 years later, like Lad McConkey. He wasn't like a big name, if I remember right. He's one of the best receivers in the NFL.
Late Georgia offer, even in state, right? Even Georgia was a little hesitant with McConkey.
Right.
But small school kid, late bloomer, all of those things, but they still got the job done for sure.
Yeah, it's pretty wild. But when we come back, speaking of Georgia, there's the $20K per month club that Kirby's been talking about. Want to touch on that. And then their rival, the Florida Gators, I think they're going to go on a recruiting heater. That is next here on the Portal Podcast. The NBA playoffs are in full swing, and every night delivers highlight-worthy performances, major momentum shifts, and can't-miss moments. Whether it's a game-winning shot or a breakout player, there's never been a better time to get in on the action. FanDuel makes it easy to stay in on the game before tip-off and live. Player props, performance trends, and same-game parlays, fans have more ways than ever to play smart and to win big. Beginning on Thursday, I believe the Pacers and Oklahoma City are going to go at it. It's going to be the NBA Finals. Halliburton is the guy I'm curious about. What's he going to do? He had a double-double and even a triple-double in one of the games, if I remember correctly, against the Knicks. Is he going to be that guy that gets the Pacers over the top, or is it going to be OKC? I think there's a lot of different prop bets you could do based on that. And there's also obviously in-game live betting, so check it out. If you're new to FanDuel, it's the perfect time to sign up. Head to FanDuel.com and place your first $5 bet. If it wins, $200 in bonus bets are for you. Make every moment more with FanDuel, official sports betting partner of the NBA. All right, John. Thank you once again for coming on the show today. But this is an interesting one. We hear about every stupid rumor in the world, and you'll text me something sometimes and vice versa that's like, this is just dumb. And we just get chuckles out of it. But Kirby Smart made a comment about players that are committed and pick the school. They're committed and they're being paid, according to Kirby, $20,000 a month to stay committed. Now, I hadn't heard that before, but I've never asked and never really thought about it. First thing I thought was it's easy for the guy sitting on the yacht making over $13 million a year to scream at people. No offense, Kirby, but you've got an easy job. I don't want to hear it. Secondarily, it's not like Georgia hasn't ever paid somebody under the table back in the day. So like somebody cheating to do something, come on, give me a break. Were you surprised though to hear a total like that? Like 20K is a lot of cash just to stay committed. I've never really contemplated it. Have you heard anything about this before?
I think we hear more about dollar amounts. Again, these are all rumors. This is all unconfirmed. Kirby obviously didn't name anybody in particular, although I'm sure he wanted to. We hear a lot about these big numbers, for me, more relative to the commitment. Let's get this kid on the commitment list. And the higher and higher dollar amounts that are now associated with that are sort of a nudge to the recruit to, hey, let's not take a bunch of visits now. Hey, you committed to us. Here's this. Shut it down, right? And we're seeing, a 50-50 rate or so without the total numbers in front of me. We're seeing some kids commit and shut it down. Caden Hall just committed to Florida, told me last night, look, I'm done. The Bama OV, the Florida State OV, those are off, right? Not saying he received money, but that's the pattern, right? You shut down the visits after the verbal commitment. But on the other end, guys who committed late last fall, guys who committed early this spring are still taking several visits to other programs and keeping things wide open. So I think the trend I'm hearing more about now is dollar amount, shut it down, and let's keep this thing going. You're not going to take a bunch of other trips if this package is being put together for you. So we hear more about that than maintaining the commitment with 20 grand a month. I think that is probably congruent with the guys who are making $1 million in these NIL deals. It's a very small amount. You're talking QBs, left tackles, corners, pass rushers, and that might be it. Maybe an interior defensive lineman or two. But it's a very small 10 to 20 guys total in this range with that type of leverage in this day and age. So maybe that group could command something like $20,000 a month to remain verbally committed. I hadn't heard that verbatim. Again, I've heard it more of the payments to get the kid committed versus to hold on to it thereafter. There's sort of an understanding of, hey, this is a lot of money, so let's keep this thing going. But look, that's like you said, Brian, this is something that is an age-old trick or ploy in recruiting. It's happened for generations and decades, and it's not going to stop in this era, even though there's more transparency with the packages these kids are getting, at least at the collegiate level. The front end of it, the high school end of it is murky at best. It always has been, and it always will be relative to cash. So I'm not doubting Kirby's comments. Certainly, I think a few guys are in that range, but as usual, it's a very small minority of recruits and a very small minority of programs that are willing to play that part of the game. But look, it's everyone calls it the Wild Wild West, and this is right in line with that.
No argument there. I think that it is the Wild West. I think that your point is very important to note once again. Quarterback, left tackle, pass rusher, corner. A few, I mean, there's not a ton in this class per se, but elite defensive tackles, they're rare. Like, I'm sure people are still making passes at Richard Anderson down there in New Orleans. Like, he's a rare player. If LSU was one of those schools paying somebody, I'd get it. Like, that kid's a 3-and-out NFL player, no doubt in my mind. But as you said, I still don't think there's many guys like that. And Kirby, in my opinion, I get it because he's looking out for his own interest in the University of Georgia. That's his job. They're losing the power of the monopoly. They don't have as much power under the new rules. They don't.
Right.
And he doesn't like it. If I was
and
him,
we know they're not spending like some others are with NIL. So I think all of that goes together.
Yeah, like Georgia could, and I completely agree with Kirby on this. You got to be really careful how much you pay guys before they produce. It screws up the locker room. Ask the people in Tallahassee about that. 2 and 10, how you doing? And if it's not something you're comfortable with paying, you got to pass on the player. I'm okay with that. Again, when I talked about those rankings that I put Kirby number 1, ironically, he doesn't make many errors on like overspending or taking problem childs in terms of their attitude in the locker room. Like that stuff, Georgia is for an upper echelon program over the last 7-8 years. It'd be pretty hard to find somebody that's done a better job that recruits at a top 10 level, let alone like Georgia's usually top 3 or 4. So yeah, it's pretty incredible. When we come back, we're going to talk about Georgia's big rival, Florida. I kind of think they're going on a recruiting heater and why they kind of need to. That is next here on the Portal Podcast. All right, John. The Florida Gators probably need some recruiting capital to help for bad performances on the field. Although they did finish last year, I believe 4 games in a row they won. So that was good. But overall, their fans are probably not where they want to be in terms of wins and losses. I'm being kind. That's obvious. Do you get the sense that I do that they're about to go on a recruiting heater? They've had, obviously, Caden Hall shutting it down is massive for them because I think he's a day one. I'm going to at least be in the 2 deep guy. Like he is a special player in my opinion because of what's above the shoulders. He just makes reads that are different. He understands the game. I don't want to say that he's a coach on the field. I hate that term, but he's about as close to that as you're going to get. And they've had some really good visit weekends based on the little bit of intel you and I have gotten. Are they a recruiting heater school? Like look out for them in the next couple of weeks?
Yeah, I think so. And like you said, it's necessary, right? The Gators came into this OV window with 2 commitments, and one of them was Will Griffin, who's been on board for over a year at this point as a quarterback. So yeah, there's been a desire for hey, we're getting great kids on campus, but can we start closing on these guys? And as you know, Brian, this is the time of year where you have to, you don't hit the panic button June 1, but if we get to, August or September and you're still in the single digits and you're still on the lower end from a volume standpoint, the panic button is close by because the season will shift things in and of itself, right? So if you're Florida, you got to start climbing here soon. And I think the combination of the visitors they've already had and the visitors that are still en route to Gainesville this weekend, next weekend, and one after is going to lead to a lot of verbal commitments. We've already seen 2, so they've doubled their commitment list in the last 4 days. So I do think we're going to see that start to pop up just a little bit more. Caden Hall was a massive splash. Before that, Ganeif Carr committed out of IMG Academy, originally from Ocala, so a bit of a Gator lean, but Tennessee was pushing. He had just visited Colorado, so that was not a shoe-in, especially at this time, as Carr at one point was talking about late in the summer or maybe even during the season relative to when he wanted to come off the board. But we're seeing Florida put the onus on some of these guys and hey, let them know where they stand. And we're seeing them accelerate their timetables thereafter. Caden Hall had a July 5th, I believe, commitment date set, but he comes off the board yesterday before all his other official visits are set to go down. Florida State was set for this weekend. Alabama, which was really the top competitor to Florida, was set for June 13th. So I think we're seeing Florida close very well with that emphasis, that we talked about a little earlier. You don't expect these guys to continue to take a bunch of other official visits. So that's why front loading the calendar is not the worst thing in the official visit window. And Florida had a huge weekend last weekend. Hezzy Kent was on campus. Carson Baker 2 weekends ago. He's one that I think could be a Florida State, South Carolina type of battle. I think Baker goes to FSU this weekend, so that one will be pretty close. I like the Gators there right now, and several other guys, that are pretty high on the board. Florida's starting to feel better and better about in the next coming weeks. And then this coming weekend, another huge OV weekend in Gainesville. So you just expect to see a bit of a run here from the Florida perspective. They're hitting the right notes with recruits, prioritizing them earlier, getting them on campus earlier. And look, Florida's got a huge coaching staff, a deep coaching staff that is going to allow these guys to get more individual attention than some other programs. Remember 2 years ago, the famous photo of all the staffers at Florida, it was like more than the actual roster, right? There was more guys and girls in polos than the players in their jerseys in the photo. And it was a big, social media thing. Hey, look how funny this is. But when you start to talk about recruiting, that stuff matters because now you're getting more individualized and intimate attention, which even in the NIL era still matters with these recruits. They still talk about feeling the love. They still talk about feeling like a priority. Feelings are still important to these teenagers, and Florida has the staff, the numbers, the resources, and the itinerary to continue to rack up some of these verbal commitments. So number 59 in the Rivals rankings right now, that number is going to shrink more and more as we get closer to July for sure.
Yeah, I think Florida is one of those schools. I think another school that will probably make some inroads based off their playoff appearance and their just magical season last year, the biggest Cinderella, Arizona State. That's a school that's going to get some recruiting bump. They're going to get some kids we didn't expect. Plus, they already got Jake Fett, the top quarterback out there in the El Paso area. Looks like he's going to stick with them. That's a guy that could be a multi-year starter for the Sun Devils. There's going to be some trends that are interesting, but I still think the majority of kids, and you kind of noted this a minute ago, John, the majority of kids are going to commit after the 20th of June. They want to take these visits and at least compare and contrast, which is why you take them anyway. And some of them, as we noted earlier, are making some money to go on these visits. I get it. I don't blame them for doing so. And that's part of it. But a lot of the kids are probably even going to drag it into the first week to 10 days of July. So it will be fun. But if your school isn't getting a bunch of commitments right now, like Bama's not, but I think they're about to go on a recruiting heat or two. Their visit list is gross. So, yeah, it's just a matter of when they commit, not if. And Georgia's another one kind of in that boat too. So we'll talk about that. Just a few commitments that I saw have happened over the last 48 hours or so. You mentioned a couple of kids for the Florida Gators. Jack Severs, tight ends, going to Wisconsin. Ole Miss got a really big flip from Wisconsin, ironically. Carmelo Reed, defensive lineman out of the greater Chicagoland area. That's a kid you cannot lose if you're Wisconsin. 6'7", 250-pound defensive linemen that are twitchy like that. You can't lose them to Ole Miss. That's a big loss. How about Cal, John? Tommy Toffee, Archbishop reordained. But what's going on with – let's just talk about that for a second. What's going on with Cal? They've got some four-star guys. You and I never talk about Cal because they don't recruit like this. What is going on?
Look, top 25 class right now on Rivals.com. 4 blue-chip recruits already verbally committed. I know we've talked Cam Brooks a lot on this show as maybe the surprise, but now we got to start talking about him as a catalyst, right? A lot of other big name recruits have started to jump in. Several at his high school have committed since, and now we're seeing Cal, complement that with the Californians, right? The West Coast guys. That there's an emphasis in the trenches that appears to be, at play right now as well, and I think there's a sense of stability. The ACC transition is funky and it kind of is what it is, but I think it's allowed Cal to expand that recruiting footprint successfully, sell a very high level of education, and it helps when your rival is going through a crazier transition in Stanford, right? So that individualized, expanded ACC academic sell with a little bit more stability than some of the other schools in the ACC in particular, I think is combined really well, up in Berkeley. So a nice run that they're winning head-to-head against Florida State. They're winning head-to-head against USC, Oregon in some cases, and that's really the formula. Can you maintain that going forward? Doesn't mean they're going to finish at number 24 where they sit as we currently speak, but in terms of that foundation, heavy on the O-line, heavy on the D-line, with some compliments thereafter. It's a really nice group developing for the Bears. And look, who's to say that they don't maintain this thing, right? I think there's a bit of a belief out west, and you got to think of the options out west, right? It feels more limited maybe than ever for those recruits. If you're not an Oregon, USC kind of guy, and shoot, how many spots does USC have left at this point? Not many. There's a big wide range of schools, that you look at, and Cal starts to look more and more appealing to some of these guys in the process. So you got to love what they're doing, and they deserve their flowers at this point because they've trended up sort of quietly, very sneakily compared to some of these other programs. And they've got their own, batches of visitors coming in as well. So yeah, Cal, top 25 as we speak in early June. It's about as good as you could hope for as a fan of the Bears.
Absolutely. Benjamin Izuka, he is an offensive lineman from the greater Detroit area. He's headed to Penn State. We got Arkansas getting Caleb Gordon, a linebacker out of North Carolina. Even got Rutgers getting a kid out of North Carolina. That is so random. 6'4", 220 pounds, DJ Howerton. We've got the Caden Hall commitment for Florida. We've got Boise State with a couple guys. Justice Fitzpatrick, definitely need to mention him. That's a kid that you know well, John. Georgia Bulldogs pick up not just a good athlete. Like you and I have seen him before. Like that's somebody that's got a lot of talent. Give everybody just like a snippet of why Justice Fitzpatrick is somebody that the Bulldogs wanted.
Yeah, obviously his brother Minka is arguably the best safety or top 2 or 3 in the NFL. So the bloodlines are strong there. But get this, Justice is 2 inches taller and 10 pounds heavier today than Minka is. So, and he's not there far off from an athleticism standpoint. Minka was 10.5 guy. Justice is a 10.7 guy in the 100. So he's bigger and nearly as fast. And I think in this day and age, that means he's going to move around. He's a guy that can play the corner, play the boundary. We've seen him do it, particularly from a zone coverage perspective. But man, I was at a spring game last month, and he played inside and looked really comfortable coming downhill and playing in space. So I think Justice Fitzpatrick is just going to be the latest Georgia DB that moves around and makes an impact in more places than one. Obviously, we talked Kirby Smart here. Kirby landed Minka back in the day at Bama with an assist from Glenn Schumann back there in Tuscaloosa. And here we are, little brother, 10 years later, assist from Glenn Schumann. Kirby closes the deal on that first official visit before Miami, before Texas, which was really a sneaky a program in this recruitment. And by all indication, Justice is another who's just going to be done. Got the commitment out the way. He'll focus on his senior season and what appears to be a new position, playing a little bit more safety for national power St. Thomas Aquinas. So huge pickup for UGA. And again, the timing of these visits starting to show up with some of these early pledges in June.
I agree. John, tell everybody where they can find your work.
Yes, sir. Rivals.com, a ton of commitments, a lot more visit previews, some must-get recruits for certain programs, all out for free on Rivals.com.
Appreciate it, sir. I enjoy having you on. Today's show, just like every other day, can be found on YouTube, Spotify, Apple, and everywhere else. Please like and subscribe to the Portal Podcast. We will see you again soon here on the Portal Podcast.